This might be a good thing that you're not fully done yet, because maybe people in the audience have a question, which is why I'm here. Any one of you, do you have a question for Meindert, perhaps? And if you guys don't have a question yet, I'm going to ask the first question. So, I see a question right there.
Yeah.
Do I have to go to the stage? No, a mic will come to you. Nice service, huh?
You said the first step was to make a model in Maya, like the head and the torso and the hips. But don't you first make a hand-drawn drawing from the character?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I forgot to tell, of course, because of stress and time. But
no stress, man. No stress.
Okay, this is a concept from Zone of Enders, a game. And I use reference files, so drawings, where I construct the model from. So I use examples, of course, yes. And by the way, you said I start in Maya, but determining or not, based on what I'm building, I can start in ZBrush or I can start in Maya, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I just start with a basic shape and just try to ground the character.
All right, did that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right, great. Anyone else with a question? I see a hand over there in the back.
Yeah, why do you use for texturing Photoshop and not like a 3D program like Mudbox?
Oh, I do, yeah. Well, in the slides I also had a link to Substance Designer, for instance, or in ZBrush you can also make textures, but you know the old school way is through Photoshop. But what new is that you can also in the sculpting programs like Mudbox or like ZBrush, you can texture, and you can bake the texture into images. And yeah, this is a process I use as well, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Right, thank you very much. So Mudbox is used, actually.
Yes, well, the difference between ZBrush and Mudbox is that ZBrush, you can only paint in vertices. And I don't know if people know what that means, but then the color is stored into the vertice and not into a pixel. And that's the difference between Mudbox and ZBrush, because Mudbox can actually store everything you paint into a 2D texture, and that's a big advantage. So now I'm going in and out of different programs to get the result I want.
How many programs do you use, actually?
Wow, quite
just
a lot.
Estimation.
Maybe over, with also plugins and tools, over 10. Maybe.
Over 10, wow. In a week time or 2 weeks time?
Well, it depends.
Well,
as I showed here, a bit of the workflow process. Let's see. Hey, where's the pic? Oh, of course, I have to put that. As I'm showing here in the process, I've only talked about the first bit. And you can see, if you go to the next, or through the whole sequence, I'm using in and out Maya, Mudbox, ZBrush, Maya, Maya, Xnormal, Maya, ZBrush. So it switches. And plugins, of course.
Cool. Anyone else with a question?
Yeah.
In front here.
Do you ever just start from Dynamesh and ZBrush instead of a base model?
Again, sorry?
Do you ever start from a Dynamesh in ZBrush instead of a base model?
Absolutely. Because Dynamesh is very handy when you only want to concentrate, and this is what I want to get across very clearly from the beginning, is to get your creative flow going without worrying about topology, about edge flow, about polygons, vertices. And Dynamesh is a very good way to also structure. So what Dynamesh actually does, for people who don't know, it calculates or it makes an approximation of how the edge flow must be. So it gives a very nice start to get good edge flow for animation. But it's only a starting point. And it's very dangerous, by the way, to use Dynamesh, because I talked about that I draw on the model, my topology, to train myself to get good topology, to get good edge flow, because it's very important for a game artist to have that knowledge, to know how to construct the edge flow, because it's very important for animation, of course. But Dynamesh is an automated system that, is very easily used, but then you are in danger to, use that instead of really think about what you're doing. So I prefer, Dynamesh as a beginning, a start maybe, but I always draw the topology on my model. It takes a bit more time, but for a game artist, it's crucial. Yeah?
Right. Any other questions in the back?
Thanks for your talk at first.
Yeah.
So where do you usually start, with ZBrush or Maya? Because I'm kind of confused. There are multiple ways to start, as long as you block it out. That's basically what I get from your talk. But when to use what platform?
Well, like I said, blocking out, you can do that by what I said, the traditional way. But whether you block out in Maya or ZBrush, it doesn't matter. Because you're not concerning about the tech part. You're only concerning about the very creative part, getting your shapes down.
So maybe personal preference also has to do with it.
Yeah, well, usually what I do, and I didn't show that because of time, of course, but usually, or I just make a sphere in ZBrush, or I just make this one in Maya, export it to ZBrush, subdivide it a bit more, and then go sculpt. And after that is done, so after the creative process is done, so I've sculpted everything out, then I'm concerning with the technical part. So all the edge flow, if I go to the right, and I started already a bit with the low resolution mesh, which means this goes into the game engine, because you have to realize, again, you have to be very efficient about modeling for a game engine. And as you can see here, this is what I built on top. And now there are good tools also in Maya nowadays to the quad draw function, is that you can draw topology on top of your model, which means that every vertex will stick to a high resolution mesh you import in Maya. And in a very quick way, I can, within half an hour, I can resculpt, or in very small amount of topology, an in-game model on top of the high res. So to get it clear, because I think it's a bit fake, I import a high resolution mesh from ZBrush, import it into Maya, and I just trace the polygons with placing dots on the mesh, and it sticks on the mesh of the high resolution mesh. And then I have topology. And then you get something like this, what you see here.
So your preferred approach would still be to start in ZBrush before going to Maya to get the right edge flow in there?
Yeah, but that's personal.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There are many other character artists who prefer starting in Maya.
Okay, thanks.
All right, anyone else with a question somewhere? I don't see too many questions over there. Someone with a question. You'll get a mic, sir.
With three on a row, do you start everyone from the start, or is it a continuation of in every step? Did you got the stick figure, the mesh?
Yeah. Well, let's go back to it. So sometimes when I get into this phase, let's see. Let's say I don't like something about this. I want to reiterate. I go back a step. So it's very structured in that way. So let's say you start from meta level. So just imagine yourself floating above the earth like Google, and you're slowly zooming in, and that's what I'm doing. So I'm slowly refining my modeling.
So it's just like when I start to draw, I start with a stick figure, and then I continue on and on until I have a fully fledged character. I will never get to that quality you have, but still.
Well, in a way, like I said, when I'm not convinced yet about what I'm making, I just zoom out again. So I go a step back again. So it's very iterative in that way. Sometimes I just don't like how something turns out. And then I just redesign or redo it.
Did that answer your question?
Not really. I meant really from the stick figure to the fleshed out character.
Yeah.
And then the step next to that, going to the ZBrush. Do you reuse the same topology? Do you use the same mesh and extend on that, or do you actually just use it as a reference from? Okay, this is the chart that's standing, and then rebuilds the character from the ground up every time.
Depending on what I'm building, for instance.
What did you do with this character? Did you actually expand the stick figure, or did you?
Then I have to go into ZBrush if there's time.
How much time do we have? Okay, we have 5 more minutes, Meindert.
Oh, well, maybe not.
I'm going to stand behind you like this, and now you're going to do it.
Okay.
But in 5 minutes.
Maybe it's enough.
Okay.
But
I think it's important for this gentleman to know whether you really take like a new slate of paper and redraw something, or that you actually use one model all the way through the end, right? If I summarize your question, So maybe just explain what you did for this character.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I've some organic modeling to do for the face, and I have some hard surface modeling to do for armor. So those are 2 different methods. But sometimes I use also ZBrush, just sculpting very roughly, import that mesh into Maya, and then trace it very precise with box modeling. So let's hide this, and then go into...
You are going to do it very quickly now.
Well, I'm opening a file.
Okay.
Maybe that's...
You're not doing it, you're opening a file. Cool.
Yeah.
Is there another question we can do in between, or?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Is there an in-between question from someone? Like a quick question. Over there.
How do you stay inspired to keep doing this? Because sometimes I get really frustrated with my work, and then I actually start disliking games.
Does anyone else have this problem? All right. Okay, big problem. Meindert, are you inspired at all at the moment?
Inspired.
Inspired. So how do you keep your inspiration?
Well, I already gave the answer, to follow this workflow, because I'm very traditional in the sense that when I started at Lost Boys Games, I come from a art education, so I knew the art principles of first grounding the character, very basic shapes, and then refine it. But I got so overwhelmed by the program that I forgot that workflow process. So I started out, with box modeling, very meticulous, very, extruding, slicing the mesh, and take days to model a face. And then all your energy, your creative energy, just goes out of the window. And so also your motivation. So, like I said, I can now build a character, and I don't mean an in-game mesh, but just sculpt the character maybe within totally maybe a week or 2 weeks, depending on how difficult it is. And before, like you would spend maybe a month to construct the whole character.
So to summarize, if you lost inspiration, it was mostly due to the technique. And right now, because you iterate so much and you just set up something new, you don't lose inspiration because of the tech anymore.
Yeah.
All right, so that's a big tip for you. I hope it helps. Do you think it'll help?
So it's really utilizing the speed in which you're working, because speed is very important to capture that creative flow. Because if you get demotivated because you're working too long on one part, then it just, it's very difficult.
All right, we're going to do the last two questions. In the meantime, I think this is still on the topic of the other question, how your work evolved, right? Or is that question been answered right now, from the stick figure to the new topology?
Well, I don't know if it's very good to see, but this is very rough. Well, not quite, because I think you guys think that this is very sharp, but this is a very rough sculpt, and I don't need much more for this to get it very sharp, because I can trace this in Maya again to get the edges very sharp, and then I go into the next process of processing that into a low poly model. And something I forgot to say is that in games we can store high definition detail into texture maps, if that makes any sense. So you can make a low poly model, a very low resolution model. You can make it look very high by using very cleverly texture maps, bump maps we call them, or normal maps. And what you basically do is you bake the high definition information into texture maps, which you map onto a low resolution model. And that's kind of the process. Does that? Maybe we'll talk later. Okay? Yeah?
All right, one last question from Meindert. Anyone? Is there a last question over there?
At the start of your presentation, you said it quite shortly, but I thought it was a big point, that a lot of projects you worked on got cancelled. How does it hit the team when that happens, and how does it hit it financially? But I can imagine that it takes a lot gap out of your budget.
Well, depending on which studio, some studios just dissolve. And let's say Guerrilla Games was very lucky to be bought by Sony, so they have quite a lot of money behind, of course. But when a project gets cancelled, I mean, it bums out the whole team. You get demotivated for like 2 months or something.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. So like I said, you pour so much into the projects. Something I didn't show. I said one picture you had to keep in mind. One last thing. I use this way of working, so just basic shapes and putting together very fast. The picture I showed is an example of that. It's a concept. It's not an in-game content. It has no detail, but it looks already quite nice, and that's also what I do a lot, is that I build a mock-up of something. I put textures on it very quickly, and then export it to the game engine, put some lights in it, and just see what comes out. So to me, that's a very good example of making a concept, 3D concept. Because for the work I'm doing now for HQU, we build prototypes. So, and that means that we cannot go into very much detail, or we can get into the final polish state of objects or levels or meshes. So, but I still have to convince the client that, you know, the quality will be okay, or what kind of direction in art-wise, what kind of atmosphere is something, and that was a good example of that. So it wasn't an in-game, very polished, very beautiful picture, but it gives a kind of a hint to something.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I want to thank Meindert, and I want a big applause for Meindert.